What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Comfort Zone Commander podcast, your place for some casual, comfortable Commander conversations. I'm your host, Dan. That's your host, John. John, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to talk about Wizards making cards for Commander, and is that a problem? Are the commanders a problem? Are the text boxes of the cards a problem? Is it good for the format? Is it not good for the format? We're going to kind of try to tackle as much of that as we can. And do not forget,
We're running our giveaway, y'all.
What?
Okay, we're giving away this sealed set booster box of Wilds of Eldraine. A set booster box, bro. We didn't even do a draft for y'all. We went up to set because we wanted to make sure that you get some collectible value in this sucker. Okay.
Oh yeah.
All you got to do to be entered to win, very simple. You just got to be subscribed to us on the YouTube channel, be one of the first 100 subscribers, and leave a comment on any of the videos during the duration of the contest. Can be this one, can be any of the other ones where we give the same spiel, so on and so forth. You do that one time, you're entered. That's it, baby. So simple. It's like one button and a couple clickety clacks, and then you can win this bad boy. Plus, get this thing out of my house. I can't stand looking at it anymore. As a cardboard addict, it's killing me, okay? I want one of you guys to get the joy and I can live vicariously through you. Put me out of my misery. And for you brave few audio listeners, I'm sure you already picked up, but head on over to the YouTube. It's the same name as the podcast here, so don't worry. We release the same content over there, including the podcast, so swing on over there and you can sub and be invited to enter. It's totally cool. Would love to have you. But without further ado, guys, get comfortable because we're going to dive into our subject. And we're going to start by talking about some pigeonholed commanders and what the heck does that even mean? I don't know. John, why don't you get us into it? What's a pigeonholed commander?
So by pigeonholed commanders, we mean the super good, super specific for one thing commanders that don't just do the one thing, but do it super well. We're talking about Tom Bombadil. We're giving a shout out to the Urs and the Markovs of the Eminence realm. And we're talking about cards like Joda the Unifier. Who I have a deck of personally, so please do not take offense to anything I'm about to say. I love the deck. I love the card. But what we're really getting at is when I first saw Joda, and Joda is a Legends Matter commander, he buffs your legends and he gives you essentially Cascade on all your legends. I thought one thing, and it is simultaneously the best and the worst part of that card and of that commander. Which is essentially what we're getting at here is that I already had a Legends Matter deck, and I had to run Joda. I had a Kethis, the Hidden Hand. He was an Abzan Legends Matter commander. And of course, he did stay in the 99, but Joda was just so cool, so shiny, so new, so interesting, and so exactly what I wanted out of that deck. I felt like I had to do it. And as much as the deck is super fun, super interesting, it's probably one of my most powerful decks. Is that a good thing? I don't know.
That's the question, right? I don't know. So, when we were first pitching this topic, I batted around with myself whether or not I considered all of it good or bad. Obviously, that's kind of the idea, right? So some of the elements of this episode are kind of a little hot take-ish, but a lot of it is as per the usual anthem of the comfort zone. There's some goods, there's some bads. We chilling. We're just going to talk about it. You guys tell us what you think, as per always. But like John was talking about, there's some good examples. John went over Joda, but like Tom Bombadil's another one I feel like recently came out. It's just a really kind of marquee example for a concept that didn't have a lot of gas to begin with. Like at least with the respect to Joda, we were seeing some commanders here and there that did have legendary or historic synergies. Historic was introduced as kind of more of that like keyworded thing back in, I believe, the trip back to Dominaria, right? That's the first time we saw it. Yeah. And in that we got a couple legends, who dealt with historic cards, and the legendary bump has kind of, been an ongoing thing, which we'll talk about in the next section here. But as a result, there were some commanders that work. Joda just happened to be the best of the best for his text box, which is one edge of the problem. But another example of that is Tom Bombadil, Tom entered a space. If you're not familiar with the card, he's a saga-based commander. He's Wooburg. He gives himself protection, and then also when your sagas finish out, he goes and gets you another saga to replace it off the top.
Mm-hmm.
So he entered a space where there really wasn't a lot of options to start with, and he entered it as the strongest option we may ever see. So
Yeah.
like there weren't really any saga commanders that a lot of people were using before that. Ironically, around the same timeline, quickly thereafter, we got one of the one of the Abzan precons from Commander Masters that could be tooled to use for a saga based commander. But Tom really takes the cake. So he stands as another example of a commander that's this idea of being pigeonholed, right? Like he's designed for one idea, he's hyper tooled for that idea, he delivers on a specific niche, and he delivers on it so strongly that not only is he the only thing filling that space, but he might be the only thing for quite some time. So, is this a problem? Is the question that we're kind of posing here, and I think that there's a lot of examples in which it is a problem, and then some ideas in which it maybe isn't a problem. One of those things I believe is what it does to variability, and sometimes it does negative things, sometimes it does positive things, depending on kind of, I guess, the direction R&D takes or when they take that direction. But maybe you can tell me more about variability issues.
Yeah, I mean, so you got things like Tom Bombadil again, like you said. There were a couple, like you said, the Abzan one came out, but most of what I had seen and what it seemed like was popular was you had Satsuki, the Tatsuki, the living legend, and she was kind of it, which she was Selesnya, so much more limited in color. And there are only so many sagas. Like sagas are still a pretty new, I guess not really that new, actually, but kind of new card type compared to, everything else. And there wasn't a whole lot available. So there were a lot of decks you were seeing that tried to do sagas that were doing things like counter manipulation. So maybe your commander doesn't have anything to do with the sagas themselves, but if you're able to remove counters to repeat the steps of the sagas, reading ahead on certain ones to start ahead and then back up if you like the order of abilities. There was a lot of stuff people were looking to do because there wasn't as much available. So I feel like there was a lot of variability in what you saw because the specific commanders for that weren't necessarily there.
Yeah. When an idea isn't like getting a lot of attention to begin with, but there's some passion and whispers in the community, right? The brewers all come out of their little hovels in the woods, and we all get to work. You know how it is, and we slam together these kind of crazy engines a lot of the times to get these ideas off the ground. Which I think that there's a lot of pride that eventually comes out in those circumstances, and it's like they say like. What's that phrase, right? Where like creativity bred in a vacuum kind of thing, like scarcity breeds creativity or whatever. It basically like, when you don't have a lot to work with, your ingenuity and adaptability, like as a person, will help to fill that space. So I feel like when we have concepts that are less supported, we have to lean on our creativity a little bit more. So when we have like Wizards of the Coast designing for these specific niches, I feel like it kind of narrows that creativity.
Definitely. I mean, that was something that vehicles are another huge example for me, where like they printed Depala in the vehicle set where vehicles became a thing, and that was it. And there weren't enough vehicles, and there weren't enough things that liked vehicles. So there was a lot of, I spent so much time thinking and brewing and crafting. And then we get back to Kamigawa, and they went, you want a vehicle commander for Orzhov? You got it. You want the precon for Shurkai? You got it. You want the alternate commander also for that same precon? You got it. And all of a sudden you're like, well, now I got like 4 or 5 options for vehicle commanders. But before that had happened, and I had spent countless hours trying to make it work, and that was a huge deck building, adventure for me. Which, when you have so many of those pigeonholed commanders, I know Shurikai is super popular. You lose out on a lot of that creative opportunity, which can be a shame.
Yeah, but on the flip side, I feel like, there's a situation, right, where like a underdeveloped idea or like one that doesn't have enough resources begs for some help and
Mm-hmm.
attention. And that's where sometimes if you push the envelope a little too far, you get the pigeonhole idea. Um, but then on the flip side, sometimes you have an idea that's maybe overdeveloped. Um, and or maybe currently has a pigeonhole commander sitting at the helm of it, where making additional pigeonhole commanders can help to diversify the field. It's like, when you have a Titan, the only way to take it down is to pit it up against another Titan. You know what I mean? Same kind of
Yeah.
idea. Like Superman. You know what I mean? Like, you gotta put like an equitable rival up there in order for there to even be a game to be played, right? Otherwise, you just pick your default all the time. So I think that there's a way in which introducing some of these pigeonhole commanders into a space where something is already kind of being constricted into one idea is sometimes a positive more than a negative. One of the examples we talked about, when kind of coming up with ideas for the show, is like with enchantresses, right? I feel
Mm-hmm.
like we've seen a huge evolution in the enchantress environment of late. Um,
Oh yeah.
you know, like, wouldn't you say the same?
Oh yeah, I mean, shout out to Wilds of Eldraine.
Yeah.
You had Sithis. I'm sure you heard it, you seen it, you played against it. Sithis was like the enchantment commander, and I feel like before Sithis was printed, there were a lot of random enchantress commanders, but
Mhm.
Sithis was kind of like that card came out. It was like, well, it's in the colors, it does everything you want it to do. So there it is. But with Wilds of Eldraine, we got Gilwain, Yenna, and Elevair, all very different, very interesting, but still in those colors. So it gives you, if you like those colors for Enchantress, because who doesn't want to keep the green and the white in their Enchantress decks? And we got Ariette, who not only is a different color scheme, brings an entirely new life and play style into the Enchantress field. So even though all four of them were in one set and they're all very niche, you're not running an Enchantress or a non-Enchantress deck with Gilwain. That wouldn't make any sense. I mean, you could, please do. But, all of a sudden you have five phenomenal Enchantress commanders, which changed what Enchantress decks are able to look like because they're all in that
Mhm.
spot.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, I feel like Enchantress is a really cool example here, especially given the time we're in and the like relevance to the release of Wilds of Eldraine. But we also got the Commander Master Precon, which we hinted at earlier, right? Where we got the Abzan colored Enchantress base commander, which also introduced the idea of like that sacrificing your enchantments,
Mm-hmm.
as an element of the Enchantress potential strategy. So I feel like this is an example where, like John was mentioning, prior to Sithis, maybe there was diversification, but like everything was a little lower power. Then we get Sithis. It's perfect. It's the pigeonhole commander. It's the dream. Everybody builds it. Lack of diversity and creativity enters the enchantress space. Now we have R&D coming in with all these other options, and you re-diversify that same build space by introducing things that maybe can contest with the pigeonhole commander that was holding the belt. So I think it's kind of this like little ladder game, if you will, almost, where a lot of this, I guess, has to do kind of with power creep, right? It's like we pushed up the power creep
Yeah.
with Sithis, but now we pushed up the power creep with a bunch of other new options that also diversify direction. So I don't necessarily think it's a problem with like Wizards designing specific pigeonholed commanders or these specific targeted cards, as long as we still have equitable and diversified options to pick from, because
Mm-hmm.
in that instance you have the compromise, right? Like you don't kill the creativity because there's a lot of directions that still have support um among the options, without necessarily just having to accept that your deck is never going to be as powerful as the next guy. um and you still get to have these really powerful pigeonholed ideas, right? So you don't lose the creativity, but you do get the benefit of the R&D, creating you kind of like a fun new toy to use in your toolbox, which I think is really fun. And sometimes also, like, of course, we get the commander every once in a while who enables a strategy that simply really couldn't work without it. So for example, for me, like I have a werewolf deck, which hopefully we'll be seeing during the holiday season here. Oh, but the only reason I had the ability to have that deck was because of Tovolar, which we've heard a lot. Like Tovolar is very well known because of this reason, hence why it's kind of a problem, kind of a not. So let me start first by saying the idea that I tried the werewolf thing, like a lot of people, a billion times over with other options, including the one werewolf guy before that, Ulrich or whatever, who just wasn't strong enough, didn't give the deck enough to do. And werewolves are kind of already handicapped half the time because they have to stay on the like worser side of their card very, very frequently, which is a little bit unfortunate. But they're so cool, right? But really, nobody was able to kind of crack that riddle to build a werewolf deck that was terribly functional until we got Tovolar, who helped to solve so many issues with respect to those creatures. He gave you the ability to flip the creatures over. He gave you the card advantage as an additional benefit. He fit thematically. So like he kind of checked all the boxes and finally gave werewolves the ability to work. But because Tovolar is all we got, that's now all we have, which may sound very like, well, duh. But the problem in that space there then is that there is really no like variability or creativity in your werewolf decks. Obviously, the 99 can diversify, but Tovolar points you in a direction. Typo decks are already a little bit streamlined, but Tovolar streamlines it even that much further, and you get a lot of this copycat vibe, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something that we almost see, like, I feel the opposite in dragon decks. I mean, we all know the Eldraine. He is the king of dragon type decks. But because there are so many other options for dragons, there are Azorius legendary dragons. There's ones in Dimir. I have a Reanimator dragon deck that's in Rakdos. There's Jeskai. There's Miram, who is also super popular. And there's so many different dragon commanders, and a lot of them point you to entirely different places and entirely different play styles, and even a lot different pieces of the color pie and combinations of the pie, that though the Dragon is super powerful and we all know him and we've all seen him, you could play against 15 different dragon decks and they could all look very different, which is, I think, something that is very good. And even when you have one that is as powerful as he is, Miram can hang. Miram can hang with the Dragon all day long. So we almost have the opposite, whereas you could play dragon decks all day and never hit the same ones, which is super cool.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like sometimes, I don't know, like things like Joda, things like Tom, maybe we went too far. You never really know. Like, I'm not sure you can print another card that would be like Joda the Unifier's equal, without like having to make something that's like way too off the scales. I'm not sure.
I mean, they already were like, all right, so there's that one really good sliver that gives all your slivers all these extra abilities, and there's this other sliver that gives all your slivers cascade. So what if we took the word sliver, made it way more broad, just legendary creatures in general, and then, guys, we're gonna put those two cards together. Also, he's just going to be 5 colors. There's no colorless pips on that boy. He's one of every color. We're just going to let it rip. What could possibly go wrong? Again, I love it. I'm not hating. It is one of my favorite decks because it is ludicrous, but I don't know how they could top it. I really don't.
Yeah, and sometimes I feel like maybe that is kind of a problem, like the not being able to top it idea. I mean, or at least if you were to top it, you again, like you're pushing that power creep issue that we see just in general nowadays, where it's like to top Joda, or to even bring like a competitor for Joda that sits at a similar level in the same kind of conceptual vein. It's like all of a sudden, like the whole format's going to start being ruled by these legendary based commanders, just because, like, I don't know, to put a bomb out there that matches Joda is like was to make another Joe to the Unifier. And we've seen like the ripple effects of having even put that card into existence. So, which ironically points us to our next concept here in terms of like WotC's design space specifically for Commander, which is what they're doing with legendaries, right? Like how many there are, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the days of, oh man, there's like 3 legends in this set. Are any of them even going to be viable for Commander? I remember there was like a subset of Commander for a while that people were like, okay, it's Commander, but your commander doesn't have to be legendary. It can just be a creature. I mean, that was the only way 4-color commander decks existed for a long time, because the Nephilims or whatever they are weren't legendary, and they were the only 4-color creatures. They were the only ones. And since then, we got, what, 5 of them plus Aragorn? So 6? So we only have 6 options for 4-color decks. So, you know, but the fact that you can look in a deck and, I mean, especially some of the marquee sets like March of the Machines. Did they literally print a legendary creature in every single color combination in that set? Like, every single color close to it got an option. I know there was one for every dual color and tricolor. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's one for every color except the 4. But that just changes the way you look at legendary typo, but also just the way you look at, like, what can I make a deck out of? Well, like 80% of the creatures in this set I could make a deck out of. Which, again, do I like the fact that there's a million different decks we can make? 100%. I am a brewing fiend. I have like 6 decks on the table right over there that are all in pieces. I got half-sleeved and piles of lands and piles of creatures and Google documents to my heart's content because there's so many options, but it's a lot. It's a lot. And there are some things that I think don't benefit. I mean, the first thing you mentioned, you were talking about this, was Urza's Ruinous Blast. What is that called? Like, what happened?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic, right? Like, I feel like Urza's Ruinous Blast had like a very small like time in the sun where like it actually had an impact and mattered. Because really, honestly, like in 2023, maybe latter half of 2022 or something, like is really where we saw this like exponential boom in legendaries, especially when we got like Lautra, you know, Dominaria, also like added tons of legendaries. You know, going back to the Brothers War, we got a ton. You know, like there were so many like story-based sets too, which like obviously like in those you're gonna get a lot of these legendary characters, you know, named characters making appearances. So in a lot of ways, it does make sense. Like when you go to like the narrative element of it. But again, like throughout this like very recent history, we got a ton of these legendaries. So, you know, me and John were talking about Urza's Ruinous Blast, which I guess, if you guys don't know, is this legendary sorcery where basically when you cast it, you can only cast it if you have a legendary permanent, I believe, or maybe a legendary creature. And it destroys, or no, it exiles, right? It's exile?
Yeah.
It exiles all non-legendaries. Now, that was crazy at the beginning. And I remember this thing being in Joda and being like, oh dear God, you know, what am I going to do? This is the legendary .dex historic, you know, one-sided board wipe. This is like insane. And it's an exile. Not necessarily thinking through the fact that very quickly thereafter, even at that time, but like very quickly thereafter, with the introduction of Lord of the Rings and stuff, like the legendary density in decks has just skyrocketed to a point where a lot of times, like John will play that card against me in Joda and it kind of flops. Like it doesn't hit my commander. And then ironically, it like doesn't hit like 2 of my other dudes who like, they're just legendary because, you know, like, like, so there's some cards that get impacted by this, even like the legendary sorceries in a general sense, like they're conditional, like legendary sorcery can only be cast if you have a legend, like kind of a cool restriction. Now almost irrelevant. Like the odds of you having a legendary just as an ancillary side effect of the fact that it has legendary on the card is quite high. So it takes a little bit of that restriction space away, which I think is, you know, like, again, like sometimes a good, sometimes a bad. I think one other thing is like, you know, cards like Unmarked Grave, which John has done a short of in the past. So obviously he can speak on it for you, but like, things like that are even affected. Why is Unmarked Grave?
Yeah, I mean, Unmarked Grave, again, it was like a super like weird spot to be in, and that's one of the reasons I talked about it when I did, is Unmarked Grave could be super cool because it forces variability, because you can't just pick whatever you want. Entomb, we love Entomb. Entomb will get you whatever you need into your grave at the drop of a hat, because it's 1 black mana. An Unmarked Grave costs an extra mana, and it can't hit legendary permanents, but there have been times, and I've actually tooled in my Reanimator decks where I run Unmarked Grave, I've had to look at the creature base in the Dragon Reanimator and in my Bug Reanimator deck, like, making sure that I'm not just running as many legends as possible, because I can't use Unmarked Grave. Like, that card is just dead, and it means I can't get certain cards, which, as much as I like that it pushes the variability, sometimes the card I need is legendary just because it is, just because it was there when a thing happened, and that gives it a name and a place and a legendary status, which is a really weird thing. I mean, another thing that we've seen is huge boom in clones. Clones, a lot of them, for a really long time, couldn't use them. I can't clone my commander, was something that you said very often. You had a clone deck back in the day, and you can only copy certain things. If you tried to run that deck today, it would be entirely different, because you can't run as many of the old clones, but there's also a lot of new cards that they have to go, well, let's put in the non-legendary clause, because otherwise they're dead half the time.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. Like that's kind of part of the discussion here, is like the con, if you will, is like there are impacts that like ripple back in time that kind of affect old card design, when card design assumed less legendaries, because that was the idea, right? Legendary is a legendary creature. Well, I mean, heck, the legendary rule was different, and it was more in tune with the original idea, right? Like, only one of these can exist. If I'm gonna slap out a Duran the Sea Shower and you got one of them's got to die, so like, even that change in general has kind of led us to where we are. But like with the clone idea, nowadays, like, we have Aruniclus's or Araniclus's, however you say, Vile Duplication. You got Spark Double. You got, in the new Doctor Who set, I don't know if you guys have seen this, spoiler alert, they released this one, I don't know Doctor Who, it's like the Alolan, what is it? I don't know. Alolan's a Pokemon thing.
Some sort of automaton?
Oh yeah, some random clone. It's like a 6-mana clone that comes in with Myriad, and it gets around the legendary rule, so that when you Myriad those bad boys, even those guys are getting around the legendary rule. So you can come down, clone your commander, go to combat, make 3 copies of your commander. You can have with that card alone, you can have up to 5 copies of your commander on the battlefield, or just anything that's legendary. And in a way, it has that vibe of like when everything's special, nothing is kind of idea, right? Like, when everything's legendary, nothing's legendary. So like, why even use the term anymore? But at the same time, I have to go back to John's original point, man. I am a brewmaster, and I love it. I don't know, like, I'm so torn, you know what I mean? This is like a problem, not problem for me, because I love having things to brew with. And especially when they throw legendary onto some random dude who didn't need legendary, who just does a whatever thing. I eat that up, because to me, that's like an underused, that's a UU bracket commander I can go and sink my teeth into and do some nonsense with. I don't know. I just love that. Like, the variability that provides like this space for like so many more legendary creatures to be completely underused, fly below the radar, just screams to a hippie builder like me. I want to build the craziest, weirdest decks that nobody's ever seen before. And having more legendaries allows me a lot more space to have things to play around with. So I don't know. I'm torn, like there are definitely impacts, and I'm not sure like what the real like answer is there. If it's a problem, if it's not a problem, what they should do moving to the future. I do agree. It's probably best to pull back slightly. You know what I mean? Just like with the overall density, I guess, because I think that would appeal a little bit to the masses. Although I wouldn't necessarily suggest going like all the way back, and doing just like 3 legends a set or whatever. I think you can adapt with the times, but maybe not go so hard. What do you think?
I think Eldraine was a good step. I feel like we didn't get quite as many legends. My thing is, I like when the legends are mentioned in the story or attached to something that's
Mm.
going on. And something that I was confused, and I know we talked about, Johan or Johan,
Oh
he's a
yeah.
legendary
Okay.
creature, and he's named on like 3 spells. I have absolutely no idea what he's doing there. So I like that he's legendary because it's a cool card. It gives you access to a cool Izzet build path that kind of goes in with some other cool Izzet builds. I have him in a deck, and I think he's on like 3 more lists. I love the card, but he didn't need to be legendary because to me, he's just a card one way or the other. But I
Yeah.
think that it seemed that the numbers were a little less, and most of the legends in the set were named characters in the story that we got to meet and see and understand. And I think that if you mention the character in the story, give me a legend, please, because those
Mhm.
are the story characters I want to see come to life in my deck. I mean,
Yeah.
I built a Balloona deck. You didn't see it, and I love the card and I love the deck. And part of why I like the deck is because that she was a named character I got to see, and I got to kind of see where she fit into Eldraine, and that made me more passionate about seeing where she fit into a deck, which is super cool. But some
Yeah.
of the like randos, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard, like again, like him, don't like him for many reasons. I like you. Like I'm a huge fan of the narrative. I love the stories. Yeah, we both listened to the story from Wilds of Eldraine.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't remember that guy being mentioned whatsoever, the Johan dude, which I think
Yeah.
is a call out to like the Sorcerer's Apprentice, like
Yeah. No.
fairy tale or
Definitely.
whatever. So like I get it. I think I get it, but like I much prefer when it has something to do specifically with the in-universe narrative, within like an in-universe set, and like
Yeah.
gives me a more of like you said, like seeing a character come to life in the game. Amazing. It's the reason why I love those old stories. I especially love the fact that like I read the old stories well and beyond after like the OG sets had come out, because reading them gave such a more of a context to the love I have for some cards that
Oh
I
yeah.
thought were cool but didn't understand like all the implications they have with Magic's history. So learning that over time was really cool. I know that's not really an experience you can easily replicate, because you basically have to like specifically avoid learning information to let it age like a fine wine,
Yeah.
and then give it to yourself later so that you could have that like, oh yeah, that's what. But and maybe that's not worth it, but either way, this is a harder one for me. There's pros, there's cons. I see the side on both. I think maybe pull back a small bit, but like I don't know, I like my legends. I'm a brew crazy guy, you know how I am.
Mm-hmm. Oh
But
yeah.
um that's not all that Wizards be out there doing between our, specific pigeonhole commanders and like just the density of legends. We also have some keywords and concepts and abilities that specifically apply to a multiplayer format, which do change how the game is played for us. So those as well we can look at. Are they good? Are they bad? I'm not really sure. Why don't you get us started? What's some of the weirdies that we got?
I mean, we'll start with two that I feel like are a really nice dichotomy of one that I've seen a lot of people really like, and the other one, everybody I ask about it hates it, which is why you haven't seen the deck on the channel. Not that he hates it, but you know how it is. You have Monarchy. You become the monarch. Cards say you become the monarch, and then you could transfer the monarchy by dealing combat damage to each other, and it gives a small bonus. Everybody that I've experienced loves the monarchy. It's not confusing to track. The initiative. Harder to obtain, you also get it by combat, and I know a lot of people don't like having to track it because it gives you a dungeon. And if you get the dungeon, now you gotta track a dungeon. So those are two big, like, player-to-player interaction things, where it's the cards deal combat damage, or attack, or ETB, and that's what gives you this thing. And then you have the thing and it gets passed around. Personally, I like them both. Don't hate me, don't hate me. I like them both. But I think Monarchy is a lot more streamlined. And it was the first one, which is kind of interesting to me. They had a lot of time to think on like what the next one they would do, and then they pulled out the initiative. And again, I have a deck kind of based around it, but it's a little bit confusing. You have to worry about the dungeons, and that I can understand why certain players would have a little bit of a pullback on that one. I don't know. What do you think about those?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, there's this problem I feel like where these extraneous cards, like these emblematic type things, like the emblems, where the effect is not specifically tied to like a physical game piece, theoretically. Like, yes, I know that they gave us like the initiative tokens, which, yes, is tied to like a physical game piece in that sense. But the idea of these effects is they don't necessarily need to exist with the physical game piece. It's like the monarchy, right? Like the monarchy as a concept, you don't need anything to go with it, like a
Mm-hmm.
physical thing that people have to have in order to track or to read or to remind themselves of the abilities or anything of that nature. Technically, you don't need anything at all. You could use a foam crown to track the monarchy, or just nothing, just a dice or a coin or a fleck of garbage, or what, it doesn't matter, because it
Yeah.
is so simple and so conceptual and exists kind of on a different plane. It's that like emblem plane, right? So if you're the monarch, all you got to remember is you're drawing a card at the end of the turn. If somebody hits you, they're going to steal the crown. That's very straightforward and accessible, I believe. The problem with the initiative, for me, is like that physical game piece thing. It is such a hard task to expect anybody to remember, like off the top of their head, all the different stages and phases of that dungeon, and then specifically which phase or step or room, that's the word, the room that each individual player is in, so that you can successfully assess the threat level of that player gaining back the initiative.
Yeah.
I love the interaction of both of the concepts. Forcing that kind of interaction, or like introducing the interaction into a 4-player environment, I think, like, right, that's kind of like the vibe, right? That's
Yeah.
why
Oh
we're playing
yeah.
a,
Oh yeah.
yeah, a multiplayer format kind of like wants you to have this like interaction. So having a concept forcer or introduce that interaction is really cool. And that's an interesting design space. But when that interaction is forced into the game, like taking the initiative, all of a sudden it's in the game. If you deal combat damage to that player, you do take the initiative. You can choose to
Yep.
ignore it, but then you're choosing to ignore value that you gained by your game action, that technically, based on the definition of the concept, you gained it. You could be like, I don't want it, and just not take your trigger, but like, what's the point, right? So like, you kind of feel forced into it,
Yeah.
and it's very dense and confusing. And in order to track it and know what you're about to get, you really need to have the physical game piece reminder or
Mm-hmm.
some alternative. I played a game once, where the initiative was introduced, and we ended up, nobody had the token, like, so the guy who was playing the initiative didn't have the physical piece, and nobody knew at the top of their heads what it did. So I ended up personally taking out my phone and pulling up a copy of it, and my phone gets passed around the table, so people could track their initiative. And because we didn't have the physical game piece per player, they weren't able to use a little token to track where they were. So we all had to kind of remember where we were at while we're passing around my phone. The thing is
Mm-hmm.
locking as it's going around. So like, I have to keep unlocking it for people. And,
Yeah.
it was a nightmare. So I can certainly understand why that nightmare scenario, because a game mechanic was introduced, is a nightmare for some people, because that was not a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of fun. Like the positives it added for me at the time did not equal the negative experience that it created in like challenging players' memory, and creating like a lot more game actions that just felt like they extended and confused the game space as opposed to adding to it. So I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the initiative, to be honest, and I hate being like a Grinch about anything, really.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
not really a Grinch. I don't like hate it. Like, if you bring it into a game, like, I'll play with it, and I probably will have fun with it, to be honest with you, in most circumstances, unless it gets really really messy. But I do see the
Yep.
problematic elements of it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I mean the two things that I do is I have the initiative deck, and I'm never gonna show up somewhere and only have one deck. So I always make sure that if that's a deck I'm bringing somewhere, that I have easy alternatives at that power level. So I'm never forcing anybody to play with it. But if everybody's cool with it, I bring my expo markers, and I have a copy in a thing I can erase and rewrite on, so that worst case scenario, I will put the marker on the table. I can give everybody at the table, including myself, a copy of the dungeon, and the flip side has the thing that tells you exactly what the initiative is. So I have that, and I have a big one for the center of the table that everybody can see. So everybody can see what it does at all times. Everybody can track what it's doing for themselves. And I give people a way to track that, because that way, if I'm forcing that game interaction on you, I'm not making your game more difficult, because that is the absolute last thing I want to do outside of playing mean cards, because they can be fun sometimes. I don't want to make your life more difficult for any other reason. So that's something that, not that I would presume other people to do, but that's kind of how I feel like I felt. Okay, I played a game with the initiative from somebody else's deck and had a similar, not the most positive experience with it. So if I'm going to do this, I'm going to make sure that I am not detracting from other people's game experience. I think is really important. But it's not the only thing we got. We also got spells that just have to do with other players. As far as we're talking about forcing the game interaction, what are those kinds of things?
I can tell you that right now.
Please
because
do.
You transitioned the combo to me perfectly. Okay. Oh, goodness. All right. So, of course, we then get some spells that allow for multiplayer interaction, just like John was mentioning or pointing towards. And for instance, some of these old examples, do you guys remember Join Forces? I think it literally only appeared on that one. Good. Only appeared on that one set of the 5 cards, one in each color.
Yep.
Although, don't quote me.
No, I looked it up before we wrote the show notes. It's 5 cards.
Okay. All right. Confirmed by John. Good on you for prepping. So these are cards like, if you remember, Minds Aglow or Collective Voyage. I think Collective Voyage is probably the only one I still see floating about every once in a while. But these were cards which were 1 pip. I think they were all 1 pip. I'm not really sure.
They were 1 pip of the respective color.
And they allowed for all players to then contribute mana towards one specific goal, which would then collectively benefit the table. I think that these were introduced at a time where like Group Hug was really kind of like getting its legs, if you will, like original Feldergriff. So it kind of made sense that players were experimenting in this design space, and that R&D kind of went down that same train with them. But Collective Voyage would have allowed players to put any amount of mana into it collectively, you and the other players, and you then got to search your library for basics, I believe, equal to the amount of collective mana spent. Same idea with Minds Aglow. It was equal to the amount of collective mana spent. You would then draw cards, each player. This idea then kind of got like a little bit of a reskin later on with that keyword assist, which I think you would have seen in a lot of the Battle Bond sets is where I think it appeared. Similar kind of idea. Yeah, exactly. They wanted you to bond through battle. Wow. That's why they named it that.
Oh my god! Because again, for everybody who didn't know, it was like a 2v2 style game. So allowing your partner to help you cast spells was kind of a thing.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So that is exactly what assist did, right? It's the same kind of idea as Join Forces. It's just now the cards usually had a generic mana, like pip, whatever it was, whether it be like 3 generic, 1 blue in the instance of what's that one card? Out of Bounds, which was the counter spell. A 1 which basically for I think it's 3 generic and 1 blue, you could just counter a spell, but it had assists, so other players could help you pay for the cost of that spell, but they could only help you play with the generic mana, I believe. Up to 3 mana could be helped to spend towards that spell for you, which I think was like a very good kind of fix, if you will, to the Join Forces cards, giving it kind of like a ceiling of where it could go. And I don't know, I do think that those are an interesting design space. I especially like thinking about like the Out of Bounds card, like the play interactions that could create, where like, you can go in on a counterspell with your opponents. The only problem I have with them, to be honest with you, is I think that they kind of need the right play group to be utilized to the maximum ability. Like, they're very political agents. Even that card alone, right? A counter spell that you can go in with other players on. Well, it's a counter. So first of all, you want to have that information be semi-concealed. But in order to plan for your opponents or other players to assist you, information has to be a little bit hinted at, or you just have to run into the perfect situation in which you have enough mana open to kind of go for it and enough incentive on the board to maybe persuade the opponents to assist you. But I feel like 9 times out of 10 in a normal table, if you just walk up and you have some of these specific types of interactions and you don't know your play group or it hasn't been previously discussed or the vibe isn't necessarily set, I think a lot of people are just going to opt to not participate because these
Yeah.
are the type of things that like they affect the game state in a way that maybe not everybody's interested in. And there's probably a lot more advantage to they know what they can do with their deck and the pieces they put in. The benefit that your card is about to give them is maybe not as valuable as the risk they take by giving you the benefit, you being the player who included the card, which maybe sounds a little bit convoluted, but I'll bring it back to like an old school group hug deck. I used to have the Minds of Glow joined forces in my original Feldergriff group hug deck. It was worthless. Why? Because nobody ever assisted me in casting it, period, ever. There was no real point because everybody knew where the deck was going. It was much more advantageous to me for other players to participate in the group draw than it was for them to participate in the group draw. And that was pretty obvious by the fact that I included the card in the deck. So players kind of
Yeah.
catching on to that is like, okay, well, the card is only cool because it provides this opportunity to join forces, but ain't nobody ever going to do that. So you might as well just play Prosperity, where you have the control over what's about to happen. Same with like an
Yeah,
assist card.
exactly.
If people aren't going to assist them, they just became like overly costed card effects. 4 mana
Yeah.
counterspell is trash. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, wait. So you reminded me the participation thing.
Yeah.
We didn't put it in the notes. Tempt with discovery, tempt with vengeance,
tempt.
or whatever. I think those were almost. I'm pretty sure they came out before assist, but those I feel like were a more broad span of like. Okay, like I think the red one was that vengeance. It was like X in a red. You make X 1/1s. Each opponent can also choose to get that many 1/1s. For each one who did, you do it again. So if I got 5 and you chose to get 5, I got 5 more. Those were a little more broad span, I feel like. The token one was the one I think I saw the most. But those were a little more broad span in that, okay, well, I don't know if I want my opponent to have 10 tokens, but if I'm also running a token deck, or if I'm running a sacrifice deck, then maybe I think I have the ability to utilize those 1/1s in an advantageous way where it is worth giving my opponent those. If I'm about to play a Massacre Worm, you can take as many 1/1s as you want, have them all, take them all. Boom. There are ways where those effects intermingle in a different way, which I think kind of gets at that option where there can be reasons because they're not, well, you could pay 3 mana to help me counter the spell, or I could just pay all 4 of it, I guess. That's a bad spell. A 4-mana generic counter?
Yeah, exactly. Well, or you had to not leave enough mana open to cast it to begin with, and then you may just end up not being able to cast it if opponents would say no anyway. But yeah, no, it's funny that you bring up like the temp stuff, because I, like you said, we didn't even think about it when we were going through the show notes. But I don't know, tempt sits at an interesting spot. I think that's a really hard design space, and I think that design has just changed. I think when the tempt cards were released, and like power creep at that time, and what we had available, I do think they were a little bit more well designed and balanced, and there were a lot of instances in which I would go for the tempt or not go for the tempt, so on and so forth. Like I think tempt with discovery is probably like the biggest one for me that exemplifies this. That's the one where you can go get a land and then your opponent gets to get more lands. There have been so many cracked lands introduced since then that back in the day, I remember very acutely, very often going and getting a land with tempted discovery in addition to my opponent and them getting more lands. I'm like, whatever. Okay. We all had like these powerful lands, so on and so forth. But I feel like since then, landfall based decks or just lands matter in a general sense, like the craziness of lands that have been introduced in the past a little bit, I don't know, anything. Like I'm not about to risk that, man. Like I cannot anymore. Lands have become cracked. Nykthos is insane. I'm not about to get you your Urborg. I'm not about to get you your Field of the Dead. I'm not about to get you your Glacial Chasm. Yeah, your Yavimaya or whatever. Like, it ain't happening, son. You can go get your one toy, and then I'm going to get it with my Demolition Field, hopefully, if I got it. Otherwise, funny enough, like, the only time I'm going to go and get it is if I'm going to go get a strip mine or something to make sure that I'm prepped for whatever other jank you got because I got mine. Right. So, like, I don't know, like that, I really honestly feel that's changed over time. Like, I feel like way back in the day that was more tempting. And now it's a little bit like the best choice is always to let them burn 4 mana to go get like 1 land. It's just like it makes the spell the least valuable of a resolution for that player, and bringing your opponent down is usually better than bringing you up slightly because you don't know why they're running that, and the odds are if they put it in, it's for some dang good reason, but it's interesting you bring them up. Anyway, we've got a few more concepts here, including something that's kind of similar to like the join forces and assists, right? Which is, you have your Undaunted, which may be a keyword that you guys haven't even really seen. This thing is only on like, I think, what did you like 9 cards total, maybe
something
even
like
less.
That, not a lot.
Yeah, like very, very, very few. And then of course we have our Battlebond lands. What do we got going on, John?
So, the Undaunted, the Battlebond lands, and just in general, they kind of have to do with something that has been around for a while but wasn't keyworded until recently, is things that check how many opponents you have. The lands, I love them. It's a great land cycle, and some of them got reprinted in Commander Masters, which is super cool. They come into their dual lands, and if you have 2 or more opponents, they come into play untapped. That is in Commander 99% of the time. You guys saw it when I played my God Typal deck back at the episode 2 that they come into play tapped. But if you have 2 or more opponents in Commander, that's a free dual land, a free duel. Did you just hear somebody say the word free dual land? No, you don't have to worry about it. There's no check. I don't have to reveal them from my hand. I don't have to have 2 or less. I don't have to have 2 or more. I don't have to pay life. Just boom, dual land. Those are great. Undaunted spells that have reduced cost based on how many opponents you have. So again, you're getting some sort of benefit just kind of naturally through playing a multiplayer format. We all know the generic cards though. The cards that just say each opponent, for each opponent. Exsanguinate. Exsanguinate is the oldest one I can think of that I ran. X, 2 black. Each opponent loses X life, and you gain the total number of life lost that way? That is dumb when you have 3 opponents. If you play that card for 5 mana, you ping everybody for 3 and you gain 9 life. That's alright. What if you play it for 10? What if you use it with that new Rowan, the scion of evil and destruction and war and doom? What if you play in that deck and you just kill everybody for free? Like that card, cards like that have such cataclysmic implications if not balanced properly, which is kind of where I see not the problem, but something that I feel like with Undaunted, they did a pretty good job. I don't know if I've ran any of them, so I don't see any of them being like, oh my word, that card costing 3 less is insane because they just kind of read this card is what it is, but it costs 3 less, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Undaunted is decent. They didn't do a lot with the space, so like, it's kind of like you don't have a lot to work with to kind of build a lot of an opinion. I feel like a lot of the cards that do exist are really just at max, like early game when you still have all 3 of your opponents. They may be like 1 mana cost reduced of their other example in non-Undaunted variants. I feel like that's why a lot of them don't get played, because if you made that like 2 mana cheaper, too powerful, too strong. But if you made it only like 1 mana cheaper, well, there's a lot of the periods of the game and many games of Commander where you're now down to only 2 opponents, and then it's like all of a sudden now you break even, then you're down to 1 opponent, and a lot of times you're paying more mana in the late game, which, it seems like that should be the spot where you can do it, but also sometimes that can make or break an entire game for you. So I feel like it's easier to be functioning at a lower power level early game and you want to be at a higher power later game. So it kind of like counterintuitively loses power as the game goes on
Yeah.
as opposed to gains power. And for me, that's kind of the reason why I always steer away from undaunted cards. It's like, yeah, I can do a big thing early game, so what? Everybody's building. It's not going to matter too much. What I need to do is be able to pull out all the stops late game, and these cards only get worse the closer I get to victory. So I don't know. For me, that's like a counterintuitive growth pattern. As
Yeah,
far as like,
that's fair.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if
Yeah, I
I ever
mean,
really thought about it that way.
I literally, as you were saying it, I was like, that's probably why I haven't run them, because for that exact reason, like that, you want your deck to get stronger, get better, get closer to winning. The closer you get to winning, and the longer the game goes on. And a card that says we've all hit the turn 10 top deck Birds of Paradise. That sucks. And these Undaunted cards probably feel very similarly. Something that, again, I don't know how we didn't talk about. The only thing better in Commander than playing a card for less is playing one for free.
True.
If you control your commander, this card doesn't cost any mana. Those cards, can we get into the hot take of those cards are bananas and they will always be bananas?
Yeah, okay, listen. Free Magic, it's a level. Okay? It really just is.
It's a level. There you go.
Free spells that are free because the text box gives you a condition in which they can be free. It's a dangerous design space no matter what you do.
Yeah.
Even in the ones that are like, pretty tame. You know what? There's one that I think is like fine. It's ridiculous. Oh God. Oh, I wish I didn't even think about it because we hadn't like discussed this, but there's like a super old one that I believe you can like bounce an island or whatever, and all you can do is like untap a creature or something. Or draw a card. I don't remember. Listen, if you guys stick around, I promise you, in somewhere, something on the Patreon or on the Discord or something, I will shout this card out so you will understand what I'm talking about. But there is a cycle of the old school free cards that it was like if you control a particular land and an opponent controls a different kind of land, then you can cast it for free. I think some of those that are like really specific and conditional can be a little bit more interesting. And usually those cards were also structured in a way that they were higher costed, so there's risk involved in putting them in your decks. Their impact was low, things like that. But like, bro, having a free counterspell because your commander happens to be on the battlefield is cracked. Honestly,
who doesn't want to have their commander? The format is called Commander. Like, if you don't want to have your commander, like, change it, maybe. I don't know. like, so you want to have, so you're already doing something, and this is something that, again, shout out to the EDH Redcast, because I can hear Dana saying this in the back of my head. If a card wants you to do something you're already doing, it is probably really powerful, because you get a free spell for just playing the format the way it was intended to be played. And that's really strong.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I can't believe we forgot to talk about this. They're wild. I mean, luckily it's not on tons of cards.
Luckily.
That was probably, honestly, probably a mistake. I don't know if I really think they added much, to the format. And also, I never really love cards where they're kind of price gouged out of in general public usage, which I don't know, that's a whole nother conversation. But the fact that getting your hand on whatever the blue one is called, what is the blue one called? I have no idea. I know Obscuring Haze. That's the only thing that's coming to my brain right now. But whatever the blue one is, dang it, now it's gonna bug me. I wish we had
Deflecting SWAT is the red one.
Throw it up in the comments if you know what the blue one is. It's something guardianship. A fierce guardianship.
There it is.
Yeah. If you put it in the comments 2 seconds ago, you win, baby. My respect and that 1 second challenge. Anyway, but fierce guardianship, bro. If you own one of those, lucky you. I mean, I happen to own one of them, so I guess lucky me. But that card is hard to get your hands on, and because it's not really seen as this taboo card necessarily in a lot of formats. It's I don't know, if you got the dough, you get the card. Otherwise, like you're stuck with the regular old counterspell kind of thing. Like, I don't know. Sometimes that's a feel bad, especially when it's like not like reserved list cards that like are expensed out for like a reason. You're probably not going to see a lot of them, but they're like newer cards that are expensed out simply because they're super powerful. But like there are a bunch of them and they can be reprinted. It's just like they're so powerful. There's so much money. It's like, I don't know. Sometimes that's a little bit of a feels bad. I can accept it with like reserved list stuff. I mean, it is what it is. We're not talking about the reserved list in this episode. Don't worry. We'll save that one for hot take number 25 or whatever. But anyway, yeah, long story short, those things are pretty wild. I don't know if I suggest they do it anymore. But then to go back to the whole each opponent thing, I just wanted to touch on that real quick.
Please do.
One thing I think is interesting about like that in general is that like older cards, like that wouldn't have been like a concept at a certain point. So there's lots of older cards that probably maybe would have got the each opponent clause if they were released at that point. And on the flip side, there's a lot of older cards that would have considered the implications of a multiplayer format if it had existed in mass at that point. Hot take for the day. This one's the real hot take. Felidar Sovereign. Okay. And whatever that other one is. Seraph Ascendant or whatever. The stupid little one white mana. Okay, guys, ready? Let me give it to you straight. Ain't nobody meant for these cards to work this way in Commander. Okay, this is how I feel. This is my complete personal bias hot take. Shout me out in the comments if you're on Team Dan here, but that's cracked. That was not intentional. Nobody anticipated Felidar Sovereign to just say, hey, you win the game for, I don't know, playing a format where you started this life total.
Yeah.
You know, obviously nowadays, and we can see it, like in that card I played in the Secret Lair Scott Fisher episode or whatever, where that dude, the first dude I played, whatever his name is, that the like angel buddy. He's the one white guy.
The summoning more life or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, he says, and this is where you can see the change. He says as long as you have 7 or more life than your starting life total, it is reflexive to the format you're playing and establishes exactly what it wants you to achieve, gaining 7 life greater than where you were. Felidar Sovereign, and this is the way that we play house rules for cards like Felidar Sovereign and Seraph's Ascendant and so on and so forth, is that you have to meet the condition as it would have applied to the format where it was born. AKA Felidar Sovereign wants you to have 20 more life or double your life total. It depends on how you want to look at it. But, you know, generally speaking, we go with the 20 more life. So you got to have 60 if you want to pop off Felidar Sovereign. You know, that's the only way that it remains. Yeah.
Yeah, or something like Soren Markov. His second ability says target player's life total becomes 10. You know what that meant? For a long time, you lose half your starting life. Or whatever. Your life is cut in half. Whatever you want to call it. Not you lose 10, your life becomes 10. You know, we can talk about the implications of if you're at 1, that could be phenomenal to target yourself with, blah, 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 blah. But I think that had that card been printed when they were considering multiplayer formats, that would have said target player loses half their life, because there's 1.5 million cards that say that.
Yeah.
And I think he would have been the same way.
A big hot take. Infect anybody?
Oh, we can't. No, that's
too hot. It's too hot. It's too spicy.
Too hot. Out. Hot. Too hot.
Okay, but
hot.
Listen, I won't linger on it. But it's true though. This was not really fully conceptualized for the format. You know, like I know, like, you know, obviously this is a hot debate topic, so we won't spend too long on it, Daddy. But listen, 2-headed giant. You guys want to know how many poison counters it takes to kill somebody 2-headed giant?
Is it 15?
It's 15. It's augmented. That's an official tournament format, and it's been augmented with respect to the changed life totals and multiplayer aspect of the format. Commander should absolutely, in my biased hot take opinion, reflect in some way, whether that be 20 poison counters.
I completely agree.
I don't know. I mean, like, at least get a little bit, bro. Otherwise, that thing is not really designed for this space, so of course it's extra powerful. But anyway, whatever. And no hate for, you know, whoever be out there doing Infect and stuff. Infect is a cool concept. I just wish it was a little bit more adjusted for the format in which we're in. in the way that it maybe would have been designed if it were introduced with respect to Commander. Anyway, moving on from that, we got one more concept that we were going to talk about for multiplayer juice, which is the whole voting mechanic, which got a lot more gas in the new blue-green Lord of the Rings pre-con, which was pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, again, back when we released that video, which was, by the way, episode 1, right? That was episode 1, Lord of the Rings. Yeah. We didn't play it, so we both have no idea most of the cards in there, or how that they interact. But we know the old voting cards, and even John was gonna build a voting deck at one point, right? Weren't you?
Oh yeah, with the new Capenna Sphinx with a man face with a beard, Esper guy.
Man face Sphinx beard guy. Actually, really clean, by the way. Look at that man's face whenever you get a chance.
It is stoic. He knows what he's doing. He's either the teller of secrets or the keeper of secrets or whatever. He comes into play, you vote. It's nonsensical, which is why that deck idea got put. Not the table over here that I talked about earlier. He's not over there. He's like back there in the boxes that you may or may not be able to see.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Silly.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I do think voting is interesting, and I especially want to try out the Latra voting mechanic and ideas. I don't know, like it presents a really interesting space, but I think it does go back kind of to like the joint forces idea, which is like, a lot of times the design space is very difficult to like get players to actually have a difficult choice. Like I feel like a lot of times it's like, okay, well, of course I choose this thing because duh, I can't do that other thing. I mean, like expropriate. I mean, it doesn't really give you great choices, but like, who are we kidding? 9 times out of 10, you're going to give them one of your random permanents as opposed to letting them take an entire additional turn. Still an oppressive card, but the choice, a lot of times it's like, well, pretty obvious I'm going to do this. You know what I mean? Yep. And that's a hard design space. So I commend them for that design space whenever they do it and tend to do it right, to get something that's a little bit more interactive. But I also feel like, like the joint forces things, it depends a little bit on your play group, or rather, sorry, like the initiative thing, like, forcing that interactivity into other players, maybe something they weren't really interested in. So just be careful if you're playing like a predominantly heavy like voting deck, or even just a politics concept in a general sense. It's probably good to like have that rule zero conversation, make sure the players are interested in that kind of level of forced interactivity into something where maybe they just don't want to rack their brain about all that, and they're just looking to like, play some mana and slap some dinosaurs or whatever, and they don't want to be voting for whether or not this guy dies or that guy gets to put in a creature for free, or like, I don't know, you know what I mean? But anyway, that's pretty much like the vibe with multiplayer focused design spaces. And I don't know, there's lots of pros and cons across the board there. And honestly, I like when they experiment. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care if they flub every once in a while. Like, it doesn't really bother me. Like if we get an initiative based mechanic, I think that players can solve those issues through their rule zero conversations and just being respectful players at the table. And meanwhile, like, Wizards getting to play in that design space brings us a lot more hits that we would not have gotten if, research and development was too scared to go there. You know what I mean? I would rather them go there and get some flops that we as players can take on the accountability to decide whether or not they're in our game, than we not get the really awesome interactive mechanics that we've developed over time because of that. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, definitely. No, like I will, regardless of what happens when I read the new card, read the new concept, I'm probably going to try it at least once. I'm going to try the new stuff. And then, just for us, for example, if we like how the thing plays out, maybe we use it more. And if we don't, I got plenty of other cards to fill slots. There's 8 million cards that go in every deck. If I don't like the Join Forces card in that deck, take it out and put something else in. Super easy to make those swaps, and I'd rather have the opportunity to play with some new toy, some new thing, some crazy whack daddy out of left field, never even heard of this before thing. Like, I'd much rather have that experience than feel like design gets stale because staleness can kill a game. Experimentation, I think, has a lot lower chance to have that possibility. And this game having any long-term problems would be the absolute worst thing. So,
Well, and if it really was like an absolute catastrophe, there are retroactive steps you can take. With bans or augmentations, take companion for example. You know what I mean? Like
yep.
they changed how companion works because of player response, because of like game impacts that it was having and being relatively too powerful. So now that you have like the companion tax, if you will, and you need to move the companion into your hand before being able to cast it. We see it in a game coming up very soon, actually, that we'll be releasing next Sunday. But I think that retroactive fix to companion is something that's available for a lot of these mechanics, right? To retroactively tool them to be a little bit more palatable, or even just to ban them entirely. I mean, anybody? All anti cards are banned everywhere. You know what I'm saying? So, like, there's things we can do in post that you can't do if you never even release the concept. Like the concept not existing, well, you're never going to get to play with it. It existing and needing a little love, that's okay. We can do it. It might be a little bumpy, but I would rather live in that world where we get new ideas than live in the world where ideas are suffocated out because people, they don't want to deal with something that maybe was a little, uncertain going into the design space. I mean, like people are literally creating concepts here for a game that has existed for 30 years with thousands and thousands of game pieces and cardboard and so on and so forth. Like the interactions possible from one card. You make one card today. You theoretically, if you wanted to be holistic, need to consider the implications of that card versus tens and tens of thousands of other cards all across the multiverse. That task is arduous for anybody. So props to the good people doing it, and we love this game, so it's a lot of fun experimenting with these things. That being said, what do you guys think? Okay, slap it down in the comments, because we're just two dudes. You know the deal.
Just two.
This is a podcast. We're just two random guys. Okay, we play this game too long and we play it with each other too much. Tell us what you think. You're the people. You're the voice. You're the guys out there doing this. You're in the grind. You're at the LGS. We're just two sides of the many side coin. So be the other side and let us know what's going on. What do you guys think? Is this a problem? What needs to change or what needs to not change? What are you most excited to play with or see at your tables? We want to know. And while you're at it, while you're telling us, hit that sub button. Possibly win this box. Okay? But as always, guys, thank you for sticking around, going on this wild ride with us. If you're here at the end of the video, you're a real one. We love you. And as always, guys, we're going to talk with you in the multiverse.